Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I have to first go back a couple of years to an article in Variety. Here is the article. Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry's estate brokers sweeping digital archive deal with Otoy. The life work of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, will be meticulously captured and cataloged in a new digital archive from leading tech company Otoy. The multimedia Roddenberry Archive will produce everything from holographic and digital renderings of the famous Starship Enterprise vessel to TV and movie sets. The effort will be formally announced at the annual Star Trek Convention Creation in Las Vegas this Friday by the Roddenberry estate and artists and friends of mine, Denise and Mike Ikuda, Doug Drexler, and Darren Doctorman. The project will include key texts and documents from Roddenberry's career. The show predicted tablet computers, among many other gadgets, after all, as well as images, blueprints, and models. The archive will span the flagship Star Trek series, original films, and subsequent spin-offs. The immediate benefit of the archive will be the ability to generate NFTs from the collection for Star Trek diehards, as well as offer the public life-size hologram installations that promise to be indistinguishable from reality via Light Field Lab. I cannot think of a more capable and innovative company to trust with these materials. Otoy's work will allow generations to experience my father's contribution to humanity with the greatest historical accuracy possible. The project will project an optimistic vision of the future that has inspired so many and remains so important today, said Rod Roddenberry. Otoy is a cloud graphics company with serious Hollywood pedigree, counting board members and director J.J. Abrams, Endeavor CEO Ari Emanuel, Google Executive Chairman Eric Schmidt, and JavaScript creator Brandon Eich. The archive will be captured using Render, Otoy's blockchain computing network. The company will also use LightStage, the Oscar-winning facial scanning service that was used on the first Avengers, creating the Hulk, to preserve original studio and physical assets. Artist and Otoy board member Mike Beeple-Winkleman will also join the Roddenberry Archive as a creative consultant, along with painter and illustrator Alex Ross. The pair will help commemorate the archive and cross-link it to both the Ross and Beeple Render archives announced earlier this year. At Otoy, our mission to develop technologies that empower artists to realize their creative visions is deeply inspired by Gene. It is an absolute honor to use these same technologies to preserve and bring his legacy to life for future generations. Growing up with Rod and spending so much of my formative years in the Roddenberry household makes this a deeply personal project for me as well, added Otoy founder and CEO Jules Urbach. Well, that sounds cool. That was, of course, I forgot to credit the writer of that article, so I apologize. Let me go back and get that and credit it. This was actually in Daily Variety. It was written by Matt Donnelly, and it was published on October 12th, 2021. Well, that's interesting. So, Otoy. I wanted to find out more about Otoy. So, as anybody does, I use that crazy, newfangled contraption we know as the internet, and I wanted to find out more about Otoy. So, Otoy, there is Otoy. That is their. I like that logo. The company Otoy Incorporated is the definitive cloud graphics company pioneering technology that is redefining content creation and delivery for media entertainment organizers around the world. Otoy's Academy Award-winning technology is used by leading visual effects studios, artists, animators, designers, architects, and engineers, providing unprecedented creative freedom, new levels of realism, and new economics in content creation and distribution powered by the cloud. Otoy was founded in 2008 by Jules Urbach, founder and CEO, and Malcolm Taylor, co-founder and CTO, and since then the company has grown to over 60 employees across 4 offices with headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, California. Otoy has notable investors and advisors. Major investors include Autodesk and Yuri Milner. Advisors include Eric Schmidt of Google, Brandon Eich of Mozilla, Sam Palmisano of IBM, and Ari Emanuel of William Morris Agency, IMG. Interesting. This is from Eric Schmidt. the executive chairman of Google Inc., and also Otoy advisory board member. 6 years ago, I predicted that 90% of the computing world, would eventually reside in the web-based cloud. Otoy has created a remarkable technology which moves that last 10%, high-end graphics processing, to the cloud. This is a disruptive and important achievement. It marks the tipping point where the web replaces the PC as the dominant computing platform. Fascinating, as someone once said. Brandon Ike, co-founder of Mozilla and Otoy advisory board member, says, "This is Tony Stark stuff coming at us super fast." Jules Urbach, the founder and CEO and chairman, sets the strategic direction and vision for the company and is the chief architect of Otoy's technology roadmap. Prior to Otoy, Jules created the web's first 3D video game platform and licensed the software to Macromedia, Disney, Warner Brothers, Nickelodeon, Microsoft, Hasbro, and AT&T. Hailed by technology writer George Gilder as the most inventive software engineer he has ever met, Jules has been featured in numerous publications, including Forbes, CNN Money, and All Things Digital. And if you go to their website, you can see pages about their high-octane render. You can see pages about Brigade, and you can read about their render technology. Brigade's a real-time rendering engine for video games. It uses path tracing to render images as opposed to rasterization like most other 3D game rendering engines. Path tracing is an extension of the ray tracing algorithm. It simulates many light paths per pixel and takes the advantage value to calculate the final color of each pixel. Whenever a ray hits a surface, a new ray is traced from that hit point in random directions until the maximum path depth is reached, until a Russian roulette-like mechanism kills the ray. As a result, Brigade is able to produce effects like diffuse color bleeding, glossy, blurry reflections, soft shadows, real area lights, the true depth of field, and much more. With other engines, path tracing takes hours to render accurate environments or objects. In fact, a well-documented case, it took nearly 22 hours to render a few seconds of ray-traced crystal balls moving around a table. Brigade can take motion-captured characters in an environment with path-traced lighting and real-time casting and render it in real time at 30 to 60 frames per second. With Brigade, artists and game developers can design without rendering restrictions. There is no need for hacks, pre-baked maps, or cheats. Yowza. Otoy sounds like a company that is doing some pretty crazy-ass shit that would benefit all of us, I would imagine. Wow. Sounds good to me. So what's been going on with Otoy? Well, here's an article in Deadline from August 25th, 2022, last year. The Roddenberry Estate and Otoy unveil first immersive Roddenberry Archive experience, a multi-year roadmap to preserve the history of the Star Trek universe. This was also written by Matt Grober on August 25th, 2022, published in Deadline. Today at the Star Trek convention, the 56-year Mission Las Vegas, put on by Creation Entertainment, the Gene Roddenberry Estate and the cloud graphics company Otoy Incorporated offered Trekkies a first look at the results of the 5-year production work on the Gene Roddenberry Archive, unveiling the first interactive, life-size recreations of the famed starship known as the Enterprise. 1-to-1 scale Enterprise models and sets have been recreated according to Star Trek Canon to visualize the history of Star Trek in new holographic mediums so that future generations can experience franchise creator Roddenberry's legacy with the highest levels of immersion and historical fidelity. While at Bally's for the convention, Otoy showcased an immersive The Cage experience, enabling viewers to explore the first deck of the Enterprise created by Roddenberry for the initial pilot of Star Trek. The fully immersive, interactive 360-degree experience allows audiences to navigate around the Starship Enterprise bridge and even sit in Pike's captain's chair as if they were there on the set of The Cage in 1964. Also unveiled in Las Vegas were recreations of scenes from Star Trek's early TV and film history that can be explored in 3D, with actors Mahé Thesa, I can't even pronounce that, and Lawrence Selleck bringing the Cage's Yeoman Colt and Mr. Spock to life. Recreations of the set from the Cage and the Enterprise Bridge was overseen by preeminent Star Trek cast and crew, including Denise and Mike Ikuda, authors of the Star Trek Encyclopedia, and renowned Star Trek VFX artist Doug Drexler and Darren Doctorman. On a main stage panel moderated by Gates McFadden, who played Dr. Beverly Crusher in projects ranging from Star Trek The Next Generation to Star Trek Picard, Otoy's co-founder and CEO Jules Urbach joined the Ikudas and Doctorman, as well as Roddenberry Entertainment president Rod Roddenberry, to discuss the past year of work on the Roddenberry Archives. The panel wound down with a concept teaser for the Star Trek immersive experiences titled 765874, which was put together via cutting-edge virtual production technologies, as well as access to light stage scans of the original Star Trek uniforms, props, and archival materials. Also presented was a second teaser, Memory Wall, exploring scenes and concepts of the characters in the Cage and Roddenberry's novelization, Star Trek The Motion Picture. The immersive, now, let me read that again. Also presented was the second teaser, Memory Wall, exploring scenes and concepts of the characters in the Cage and the Roddenberry novelization of Star Trek The Motion Picture. Now, a lot of people, I would like to point out, a lot of people think that the Star Trek The Motion Picture novelization was written by someone else other than Gene Roddenberry. It was, in fact, not. Gene Roddenberry did write the novelization himself. And if you've ever wanted to experience, I think, more than anything, if you want to experience some uncut Star Trek, I cannot stress enough how much you should all read the novelization for Star Trek The Motion Picture. It was re-released back in 2019 for the film's anniversary, 40th anniversary. All I can tell you is you should read it. Now, I'm going to show these two movies because a lot has been made. Maybe if you watch other YouTube channels, you will have seen other people play a third movie that was just released in conjunction with the ending of Star Trek Picard. But I would like to play these first two pieces for you because there's things to talk about. So here's the first piece, 765874. Now, even though that was very brief, if you know anything about visual effects, pretty damn stunning. It looks very stunning. Now, what I saw this dropped online last year, and there was a lot of things that struck me as being familiar. Obviously, one of the things is Yeoman Colt was in that. Looks exactly like she did in The Cage, the original Star Trek pilot. And what was strange, I mean, what was interesting about that is that character, J.M. Colt, she was, let me read to you. So J.M. Colt she was part of The Cage. She's not part of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, strangely enough, which I don't know why. But maybe there's a really interesting reason for that. I don't know. But hey, what can I say? She's not in the show, but she was in this sequence. And I thought that was kind of neat and looks exactly like the actress. I mean, not like a deep fake. It's almost as if they were able to absolutely recreate the actress using their technology. Now, here's the second film that they debuted last year, Memory Wall. Now, for those of you who might find that term familiar, the Memory Wall sequence was a sequence that was kind of filmed, sort of, not very well, that was excised from Star Trek the Motion Picture. It was a big effect sequence. They could never quite make it work properly. It's never been restored. But here is Memory Wall. Now, oops, I cut that off the end. I forgot the Spock was there. But a brilliantly rendered Spock in his Star Trek, the motion picture duty uniform. It's amazing. I'm sorry I cut that off because hang on. Maybe I can, because I cut it off, I'll try playing it again because you have to see. People are like going, why'd you cut it off? There you go. That's not quite deep fake, but it is fucking astonishing. So that was a year ago that Otoy was doing all of those things, and amazing stuff. Now, cut to this year, and April 27th, there was an article about the continuing, this is in Deadline. So this is April 27th, 2023, just last week. The Roddenberry, or 2 weeks ago, the Roddenberry Archives and Otoy unveil a new virtual Star Trek experience allowing Trekkies to examine every evolution of the Starship Enterprise bridge and even walk across it. Following the recent conclusion of Star Trek Picard on Paramount+, Otoy and the Roddenberry Archive have unveiled the next evolution of the Roddenberry Archive, a multi-decade collaboration with the Gene Roddenberry estate to capture the Star Trek franchise architect Roddenberry's lifetime of works for future generations with holographic immersion and in the most historically accurate sense possible. The largest ever collection of iconic Star Trek digital archive works will be made available for free for the first time through a new web portal, bridging the legacies of all three major areas of Roddenberry's Star Trek with help from stars William Shatner and John Delancey, as well as showrunner, writer, and EP Terry Matalas. The web portal will allow fans to virtually explore the many dozens of evolutionary iterations of the famous Starship Enterprise bridge, which is going to be very exciting. Across every epoch of Star Trek's history, with each bridge made accessible in the timeline as a 1-to-1 scale in-universe 360-degree recreation. John Delancey, who has portrayed extra-dimensional being Q since 1987's Star Trek The Next Generation, narrates a supplementary documentary offering a deep dive into the evolution and legacy of the bridge, from its inception in Pato Guzman's 1964 sketches through its portrayal across decades of film and TV series to its latest incarnation on the Enterprise G, as revealed in the final episode of Star Trek Picard. This combined documentary and exploratory online experience brings the legacy and history of the Starship Enterprise to life through meticulous recreations of the filming sets used for production, as well as the aforementioned in-universe, life-size, functional, immersive, virtual interiors. The recreations were produced for the Gene Roddenberry estate and overseen by veteran Star Trek artists including Denise and Mike Kakuda, who authored the Star Trek Encyclopedia, as well as Darren Doctorman, Doug Drexler, and Dave Blass. The archive will also, for a limited time, allow fans to try an experimental technology preview through the web portal, enabling them to walk onto the bridge of the Enterprise, boasting working turbolifts and consoles, and explore them in every detail, all from an instantaneous live stream. Accompanying the interactive bridge experiences in documentary film is a series of 23 featurettes exploring Star Trek's behind-the-scenes production process with commentary from Star Trek luminaries who share Roddenberry's vision for the franchise. The first featurette teases Shatner's hours-long testimonial for the Roddenberry Archive, captured holographically within a perfect recreation of the 1979 USS Enterprise bridge. The icon therein shares his memories, aspirations, and intentions in bringing Captain Kirk to life in 1965 and portraying his death in 1994, as well as his personal views on the future he envisions for his beloved character, including visualizations from his 1995 novel, The Ashes of Eden. And this goes on and talks a lot about the Roddenberry Archive portal gives the public a first glimpse into the many years of incredible work done by the Archive's world-class production team, both in preserving Gene Roddenberry's legacy in tandem with visually documenting 60 years of Star Trek history in detail, says Jules Urbach, who serves as CEO of Otoy and the Roddenberry Archive. Through new technology, we can bring audiences back in time as if they were there on set during the making of Star Trek. Over multiple decades, we've been exploring the frontiers of new technology on how we might document my father's vision, work, and ideas that can be experienced by generations yet to come, added Roddenberry Entertainment President Rod Roddenberry. The Roddenberry Archive is not just a way to honor my father's legacy, but my mother's, Majel, as well. She voiced the Enterprise computer for decades, and in 2008, before she left us, she meticulously recorded her voice phonetically with the intent to preserve it for some future technology to bring it back to life. We waited 15 years, and today I am proud to have her voice, just as I remember it, welcoming visitors to the Roddenberry Archive portal. So that's very exciting. Now, let me just say, if you've watched, I'm not going to play the documentary on the bridges, but if you watch the bridge documentary, it's on YouTube now, you can go watch it. It's incredible. And the digital recreations of the bridge are incredible. And the way they show you the entire history of the development of the bridge, they go into more detail. I mean, let me tell you, I've got every single Star Trek book, reference book ever published. And this 1 8-minute documentary does more in explaining the bridges than most things I've seen. It's incredible. And also, there are other very interesting things in this bridge documentary, such as the design of the USS Discovery. I've talked about it before, but they actually show you what the Ken Adams / Ralph McQuarrie, yes, that Ralph McQuarrie, were doing, designing what the Enterprise could have looked like for the abandoned film Star Trek Planet of the Titans, where Toshiro Mifune was maybe going to play a Klingon, and of course it was going to be directed by the great Philip Kaufman. Everybody should look at this documentary. It's incredible. And the fact that they have Drexler, that they have the Okudas, and they have Darren Doctorman working on this means they have the most qualified people on the planet Earth to be overseeing this archive. Let me just say that. But we're going to get to what really interests me about all of this in a minute. I'm going to play the last of their movies that was just released, and we'll talk about it right afterwards, and I'm going to tell you where I'm at here. Now, when I watched that a couple weeks ago, and people like Dave Cullen have done YouTube videos, what I realized when I was watching that was that all three of these videos are telling the same story. First of all, how astonishing is that? Now, it's not quite deep fake technology, but the rendering technology that Otoy is doing is absolutely astonishing. And the thing that really struck me about this video, especially this last one, Regeneration, was every single shot had an elegance to it. And I would say, if this makes any sense, a maturity to it that Star Trek has been completely lacking in the Kurtzman era. It's just a different aesthetic, a completely different approach. I would call it a very classical approach that I think has been sorely missing from Star Trek in the modern era. It's just a taste issue with me, but even the shot choices and the shot design, but most of all, the feel of it all. And then, of course, the canon of it all. And when I was watching this, I was like, wow, and I was thinking about all the things going on, and yet, why did they use that number? The number was familiar to me, but I don't remember why I was even thinking about that number. I didn't really look into where it came from until I read a Twitter thread just the other day that I wanted to get into. And this Twitter thread comes to us from Stephen Dignan. Stephen Dignan at stephendignan.com. By his own admission, a writer and story artist, ex-Giant Animation, Brown Bag Films for Amazon, Apple, BBC, Disney, DreamWorks, Nickelodeon, RTE. Hello at stephendignan.com. stephendignan.com put together a very interesting Twitter thread, and I thought I would share it with you about the 3 short films that we just watched. So he tweeted out, I was curious about the end of the short film Roddenberry and Otoy released last week, specifically the significance of the time jump back to the motion picture era Spock. Now remember, we saw this at the end of the second one as well, Memory Wall. So I did some homework, and this is what I came up with. This is a 36 tweet long thread. First of all, he says, the film, if you haven't seen it, it's the third in a series of concept films produced by Otoy as part of their work on the Roddenberry Archives. Spoiler alert for the end season of Picard. And then he goes on to say, the film's release was obviously timed to follow the end of Picard, which revealed the saucer section of the Enterprise D had been retrieved from Veridian 3, where it crash-landed in Generations. And that is true. However, the film doesn't just connect Star Trek Generations and Picard Season 3. It also adapts a scene previously depicted in both the novel, the first Shatner, Reeve Stevens Star Trek novel, The Ashes of Eden, and the comic miniseries Spock Reflections. So what Otoy is doing here is what I've always thought people should do in terms of having IP. When you have a lot of IP that's brilliantly written and conceived of, the William Shatner novel The Ashes of Eden was previously adapted by DC Comics, and it's great, by the way. This book is great because Shatner picked the Reeve Stevens, 2 of the greatest Star Trek novelists, a husband and wife team, Judith and Garfield Reeve Stevens, to write this book. And then, of course, they used the IDW comic Star Trek Reflections. So they're tying in not just Generations and Picard Season 3, but also a Star Trek novel and a Star Trek comic book to play into this series of short, call them tone poems, if you will. This is exactly what I have been talking about when it comes to IP. And here we have, once again, you have these 2 shots. Now, that number, 765874, what is that number? We'll get to that. Now they go on. Now here you see images from Spock Reflections, the 2 comic books. You see then 2 images from the Regeneration film. Spock is visiting Kirk's grave on Viridian 3 from the Ashes of Eden and the Spock Reflections comic. And as Mr. Dignan says, and this is where it gets interesting, the film extends the scene past what came before with a match cut to a younger Spock. And here's this. With a match cut to a younger Spock circa the motion picture, intercut with a brief flash of the destruction of the Enterprise as originally seen in The Search for Spock. The film is clearly linking the destruction of the two Enterprises in Spock's mind. But which Spock? The chronology of events would suggest we're seeing the older Spock recalling history. However, the young Spock's performance reads more like he's experiencing a premonition of what's to come. Well, how could that be possible? And the answer is in the last shot, the set of numbers that close each film. And here are those numbers. 765874. These aren't random numbers. What are these numbers? These numbers are, get this, the service number of Yeoman Colt, who appeared in the very first episode of Star Trek, The Cage, the rejected pilot, as well as several books and comics, and features in the other two concept films, the films that came out before that number, and of course, Memory Wall, and which we just watched. And then he goes on to say that Colt's service number appears during a 4-issue story from the early Voyages comic, which it turns out is the key to understanding all 3 films. Now, I want to step in here and say I was believe it or not, a paid Star Trek consultant for Paramount in the mid-90s. And when I was there, Paramount had decided, Viacom Licensing had decided to take away the Star Trek franchise from DC Comics. And DC Comics had held the franchise since early 83, after Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And they did, for over a decade, a phenomenal job with the Star Trek franchise. An incredible job. They had everybody from Diane Duane, a great Star Trek novelist who worked on the original season of Next Generation, the first season, Peter David. They had Tom Sutton and Ricardo Villagrán doing art that was fantastic. Their first Star Trek comic had a Klingon on the bridge of the Enterprise, Conan. And the first series of Star Trek, their volume 1 that DC did, was really quite incredible, with writers like Mike W. Barr doing an amazing Mirror Universe story. So when I was working at Viacom Licensing, they decided to pull the license from DC. And I wrote, what did I care? I was, they're going to fire me, they're going to fire me. I thought that was a really stupid idea. I thought it was really stupid. Why would you do that? DC's been doing, and plus I collected all the DC comics, so I wanted to see them continue because they were fucking great. Well, there's nothing I was going to tell a corporation that had made up its mind. So they pulled the license from DC and they gave it to Marvel. And Marvel did very Marvel-esque comics. But surprisingly, I thought the very best of those comics was, in fact, the comics with Captain Pike as captain of the Enterprise. So Colt's service number appears during a 4-issue story from the early Voyages comic, which it turns out is the key to understanding all 3 movies. And here is the early Voyages comic. And of course, this is basically Strange New Worlds. It was better than Strange New Worlds. Just saying. A lot of, maybe because it had Dr. Boyce and Colt in it that were part of the Enterprise crew that has now been, of course, retconned in Strange New Worlds. But anyway, there you go. So, Early Voyages was the Strange New Worlds of its day, a prequel series on Pike's Enterprise taking its cues and Colt from the original pilot episode, The Cage, that was, of course, rejected by the network. The relevant story begins in issue 12, Futures Part 1, in which Colt accidentally time travels 40 years into the future. Interesting, right? Side note, for some reason, the cover art is referencing an unrelated, often parodied X-Men cover, which he thought, what Stephen Dignan thinks is weird. But it's true. But Marvel Comics has a history of doing that. Actually, all comic book companies do. Then we get to here. Anyway, at the end of issue 12, Yeoman Colt is sent to the future in a flash of blue energy, as artfully depicted in 765874. So, what was going on in issue 12 of the New Voyages comic, or the Early Voyages comic, is being recreated by Otoy and the Roddenberry Archive in their 3 short films, which is pretty amazing. And then, of course, we go to here. Issue 13 reveals her destination, 40 years into the future, where the Enterprise now rests in the San Francisco Smithsonian Museum of Air, Sea, and Space, recreated extremely faithfully in their Memory Wall episode. Or actually in the first one, in the first episode, 765874. And then Stephen goes on to point out that, which brings us to the second film, 765874, Memory Wall, which jumps forward from Colt's Cage era into the motion picture era. And you can see this. I mean, again, even the angle of the Enterprise. Of course, Darren Dochterman, who was working on this, of course, was the special effects supervisor for the recreation of, for Star Trek, the 4K Star Trek, the motion picture. And then look at this, something we've never seen from the motion picture era. Again, Yeoman Colt and Spock looking damn good. While 765874 only adapted scenes from early voyages, Memory Wall, the second film, imagines an original scenario where Colt apparently served aboard the Enterprise post-motion picture and engaged in a mind meld with Spock. So you've got 2 of these images. This is extending Star Trek canon. You can see that Colt is in a motion picture uniform. This has never been dealt with in Star Trek history, in my mind, whether it's alpha canon or beta canon. But it's fucking awesome. I mean, it unlike the Strange New Worlds TV show, Yeoman Colt is still there, still a part of the Star Trek universe, and is mind melding with Spock. So what Otoy has now done with these films is they've taken a story that occurred in a Marvel Star Trek comic from the mid-90s or later 90s, and they've incorporated it into Star Trek canon and are telling us a story about a character that only existed in the unused pilot for The Cage until they repurposed it in the original series for the first season in The Menagerie. So for canonistas or canon pornographers like myself, let me just tell you, this kind of shit's orgasmic. I'm watching this going, oh my God, as I'm, and I saw this, but I'm just, Stephen Dignan's doing such a great job of laying it all out. So then here we go to this. And oh, hang on, let me go to this. He goes here and points out, if you're confused, here's a timeline. Colt travels from 2254 to 2293, and Memory Wall takes place sometime in the 2270s after Colt returns to 54. We have conflicting dates for the motion picture, but it's generally accepted it took place sometime in the early 2270s. So, that's very cool stuff. Now we go to here, which is also amazing. Within Spock and Colt's mind meld, we return to Colt's story from the Early Voyages comic, where she's traveled to 2293, and we see the Well of Sorrows, a mythical site in the ancient city of Ithahulan on Algo 2. I mean, come on. Now, what's interesting, if you take notice, the oval-shaped hole in the top of these is very representative, and I know what it looks like, but it's very representative of something we saw in the motion picture with V'ger. So they're doing some deep dives here. In issue 15, Colt returns to 2254 by jumping into the well, and in the process sees all possible pasts and futures collide and blend inside her mind. However, the memory wall film depicts the experience a little differently. And we'll jump into that here. So here you have concept art from the motion picture and a storyboard from the motion picture. At this point, it's worth noting the film takes its title from an abandoned sequence from the motion picture where Spock was to travel along a memory wall inside the V'ger machine entity and meld with a memory sphere, not unlike the sphere that propelled Colt through time. That's not quite what happened, but because they couldn't afford to do it properly. But it's still doing it. They're still doing it. Here's, you can see the memory wall from the motion picture. The V'ger connection continues as memory wall offers a new angle of the Well of Tomorrows, which heavily recalls the distinctive portal Spock enters in the motion picture, dubbed the Space Lips during production, before he melds with V'ger to learn its history. Now here's more canon. Once inside the well, we see another image original to memory wall. The earliest spacefaring enterprise, the XCV-33-0, crashed in an icy waste. First seen in Star Trek the Motion Picture, a painting in an episode of Enterprise dates it as pre-2143, firmly in the past for Colt. Now I want you to notice something too. What's so awesome in the Roddenberry Archive video about the bridge is they actually do a very cool, you see in the upper right corner there, a very cool render. You see it in space. You see, and the ring ship, the ring ship was actually originally conceived of during the time when Star Trek was being conceived of. So it has a long history within the Star Trek canon. And it's really great to see it finally appear somewhere. And in these images, also Eagle Moss made a great special edition toy of it, which is awesome. But you can see below that, where Ilea is standing in the motion picture, the ring ship first appeared canonically in Star Trek on this wall at the back of the rec deck in the motion picture. So there you go. Crashed enterprises are a recurring theme here for reasons that should be clear by the end. So in these movies, in Regeneration, in Memory Wall, and then of course Redolent, they showed a search for Spock as well when the Enterprise was burning up in the atmosphere of the Genesis planet, which was created out of the remnants of the Mutara Nebula, and of course Star Trek The Wrath of Khan. So here's where Memory Wall's portrayal of the well from the comic differs. Instead of a stream of images, Colt makes physical contact, triggering a series of flashing images. We've seen this before in both the motion picture and in Star Trek Picard when organic minds come into contact with machine life. So now this is canonical to Star Trek Picard Series 1. So, man, these people at Otoy and Darren and the Okudas and Doug Drexler are doing some deep-ass dives, let me tell you. And I'm so there for it. To say that this gives me major wood is an understatement. I'm just saying. Our first explicit V'ger connection comes in one of the flashing images, the Voyager 6 probe, the oldest part of V'ger. And then, of course, you see the plaque of that that we saw in Memory Wall. So, and then Stephen Dignan goes on to say, and just as Spock saw the machine planet that created V'ger, Colt sees a machine hand, which, if not an intentional V'ger connection, at least suggests the Well of Tomorrows may also be of machine origin, an evolution of the Well's mythology in the comics. All of the V'ger parallels suggest a link between Spock and Colt that wasn't there before. Of course, because we never saw them enough. A shared experience that may have something to do with their mind meld. Is Colt aware of the knowledge she carries? Is Spock trying to unburden her mind or use her to see the future? Well, who knows, right? We don't know. Whatever the case, it's here that Spock first sees the destruction of the Enterprise roughly a decade from now, as seen in The Search for Spock. And here is, of course, an updated timeline of where everybody goes. 2254 is the cage, and that's where 765874, the first short film, takes place. Then you have the motion picture in the 2270s and the film Memory Wall, where Colt is on the motion picture Enterprise. And then, of course, they're talking about Search for Spock. And then you go to 2293, where Colt finally went into the future. So that's all very interesting. And that brings us back to Regeneration, the newest film. With the context of the early Voyages story, it's clear that 2270 Spock is foreseeing the destruction of the Enterprise in 2285. But not only that, and this is something I love, and I have to give Mr. Dignan credit for pointing this out, but I did think of this too, I have to say, because I love this. I love Arrival. Deliberately or not, the new visuals of Viridian 3 are very reminiscent of another film about nonlinear time, of course, Arrival, which I love because it's so good. And of course, Arrival ends on a very similar note to Regeneration, the third film. The final scene with 2270 Spock isn't a flashback. The whole film before this has been a premonition, and we're left with Spock, like Louise in Arrival, contemplating a future of pain and heartbreak, and of course, accepting it. So, there you go. These three films that Otoy made with the input of a lot of people made this Trekker. I mean, I'm going crazy. And I'm thinking a Star Trek novel, a Star Trek comic, multiple Star Trek movies, all turned into basically what is a tone poem that tells the story about Spock and his crewmate Yeoman Colt, who we first met, well, originally met before we'd seen the cage. We saw them in the menagerie together. And it's amazing that they tied all of this together into something cohesive. Now, this is different than, say, the producers of Star Trek Discovery going back and taking Harlan Ellison's, to be cheeky, they went back to Harlan Ellison's original comic book adaptation of his original script of City on the Edge of Forever. And they decided to use that by being cheeky and throwing out the continuity. I understand you guys want to be cool and put your own imprimatur on something, but by taking the rejected story that Harlan Ellison wrote and not using the rewritten version that we saw in City on the Edge of Forever and anthropomorphizing the Guardian of Forever, Paul Guilfoyle is wandering around as Doctor Who / the Guardian, made me want to scoop my eyeballs out with a teaspoon. Whereas this takes comic lore, this takes movies and novels and combines them into something beautiful and poetic, and most of all, Star Trek. The only people that could have done these Otoy movies are people with a deep respect, understanding, and most importantly, a deep and holistic understanding of the franchise itself. And to me, this is how IPs that have all this extraneous material beyond the movies should be handled. And it means that who do they have working on this? They have the Okudas. Mike Okuda first worked on Star Trek when he was working in the art department on the Voyage Home in 1986. Denise Okuda, she hates when I say this, Denise Okuda was on the rec deck set in Star Trek The Motion Picture. You can find her. Well, you might have to have somebody help you. And Doug Drexler, that guy was selling Star Trek memorabilia in New York in the 70s. These are lifer Star Trek fans and people that have worked on Star Trek professionally that are the most knowledgeable people about Star Trek. And Darren Doctorman, who's fanatical as well. My good friend Darren. They're fanatics. They're Star Trek, but in the very best way. They're the people that the Roddenberry Archive has hired. That's how you make it great. When you're working with IP, now, of course, combine them. They weren't invited to work on Star Trek 09. Combine them with the wherewithal to create the ultimate. And I'll tell you something, it's really kind of sad, is if you watch the Roddenberry Archive documentary on the bridges of the Enterprise, and I'm probably going to get demonetized for this stream anyway because I showed these clips, but whatever. It's amazing how when you get to modern Star Trek since 2009, none of the design work really fits anymore. I mean, I leave that up to you to decide. And you'll see, why did they change the Discovery? When there was a teaser trailer for Discovery. After Brian Fuller left, they redesigned the Discovery and took away the circular warp nacelles, and they made it look like a pizza cutter, and they made it very spiky, and I don't know why they did that, but they did that. So anyway, to me, what the Roddenberry Archive and what the technology that Otoy is bringing to the party, you're going to be able to walk through the refit Enterprise, my favorite fictional starship of all time, the refit Enterprise from Star Trek the Motion Picture, deck to deck. If you watch the Roddenberry documentary, it's the one about the bridges, it's incredible all the nuggets that are in there. I mean, they're going full bore. It's going to fucking rule. I mean, I'm telling you, this stuff, it doesn't get much better. So, anyway, I know people are probably not even watching the stream anymore. They're like, what is this guy talking about? Let me just say that I wish that every franchise, Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, the Alien, the Predator, Predator, I just wish that all of our IP was treated with this kind of respect. And when you see these 3 little short films and the fact that they're doing deep dives into the lore, because that's what when I watch Star Trek Strange New Worlds, I don't believe what I'm watching. I don't believe that's the way people would talk to each other in a quasi-military environment. Even when you watch the trailer, what's the mission? To explore. Really? It's 57 years of Star Trek. Do we not know the mission is to explore? Look at that new trailer they dropped in front of Star Trek Picard Season 3, the trailer for Season 2. I mean, it's like, is that supposed to get... It's like I've said, Strange New Worlds is the Star Trek Vegas show version of Star Trek. And when you watch that trailer, it's like, it looks like, dinner theater in Vegas. Not dinner theater. It's a Bellagio show. It's an expensive show. But I don't believe it. I don't believe anything about it. I don't believe the way starships move in that show. I don't believe the uniforms. I don't believe anybody talks to anybody that way. I watched those 3 short films put together, and then Mr. Dignan's analysis. By the way, one more time, I want to make sure that I give him credit. That analysis comes from Stephen Dignan. I don't want to be ever accused of stealing all that great work that he did, because I think he did a fine job. So I love it. So, Mr. Dignan, well done, sir. All IPs. If you guys want to make money, if the studios want to make money, you need to get people that can do this kind of a deep dive on your franchise. And it doesn't have to be intimidating. You've got to find writers and creators that are down for this. Otherwise you're going to wind up with fucking Rings of Power again with a 37% domestic completion rate. Again, 37% of the people that started watching Rings of Power on Amazon, only 37% who started watching the 8 episodes finished them. If that's a Netflix show, if you have a completion rate below 50%, they cut it. They're gone. Rings of Power, 37% completion rate. That's terrible. And the reason it's terrible is because you didn't engage your viewers. And your core fan base should have ate that up. But nope. Hey, but they're doubling down. Good for them. Maybe season 2. Hope springs eternal, right? Woohoo!